The Doomer Bloomer podcast is a community for the resurrection of good ideas. We profile the hero's journey in weekly episodes and teach people about the 10 pillars framework for success in life, business, and relationships. Our mission is to find and help all Doomer Bloomers with mental health issues, poverty mindset, lack of resources, and those left behind in this world. Tune in weekly with Will S. and occasionally John Wynn as we have deep conversations with guests about the hero's journey, clown world order, and the resurrection of good ideas. To help support our community, go to www.thedoomerbloomerpodcast.com/support to become a member today. And remember, we are the cure for COVID-19. You had to click continue. Yeah, welcome back to the Doomer Bloomer podcast with Will S. We're talking about the hero's journey, the 10 pillars framework for success, life, and business and relationships, specifically health, wealth, and wisdom. We search out interesting guests on their own hero's journey, talk about the projects that they're working on, how they're contributing back to society. Today on the podcast, I have Christopher Earnshaw, PhD, all the way from Tokyo, Japan. How are you doing this evening, or I guess it'd be morning there for you, Chris?
Yes, it's early morning here, and I'm very well, thank you.
All right, excellent, Chris. So before we get started, what prompted you to reach out to the Doomer Bloomers, and you know, where are you on your hero's journey, so to speak, right now?
That's a very complicated question. I was interested in your podcast because of your interest in the Tao and Daoism, and I'm also very interested in Daoism. I've studied it many years, and so I saw a connection there, and so I sent you an email. My hero's journey, yes, well, I'm probably coming towards the twilight of my career, and I retired several years ago, and I'm not quite sure if there's much of a journey left, but I'm always in discovering new things, and always trying to learn something that will either benefit me or other people. So that's in a nutshell where I am.
Excellent. So you are, well, you're a self-published author. Tell me a little bit about how you got started writing, because you weren't always a writer, right?
Correct. I've written about a dozen books, and 3 of them are in Japanese. From a young age, step back a bit, I went to a boarding school from the age of 5 until 18. And in those years, in my age, we didn't have television at school, and there was nothing to entertain yourself except books. So I read everything. And there's a series of paperback books in England called Penguin. And at the back of the book, they introduce other books. So I just read one book and then looked at the end of the book and then bought the next one that they were offering. And I didn't have any plan of what to read. And I think I spent 2 years reading nearly all the Russian classics, from Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Lermontov, you name it. I've been there. And it was only because they kept introducing another Russian book at the back of each book I read. So having read so many things, after a while, you feel that you've got a book in yourself. You know, there's something you want to contribute, because you connect so many bits of information, and they seem to be, I come up with an idea, but it's not in anybody else's book, so perhaps I should write my own book. And that's how it came around. The first book I wrote was on Japanese calligraphy. When I came to Japan, I studied at university here, and one of the courses I took was calligraphy. Well, I thought it was like learning how to write. I didn't think it was an art form per se, but just learning your ABCs. And afterwards, that was at the beginning. And after I passed several exams and became a kind of master calligrapher, I decided, well, no other foreigner has written about calligraphy, Japanese calligraphy. So I contacted a publisher and I published a book. And that's how it all started. I think that was 1982. Yes.
Before my time, as they like to say.
Yes, I'm sure it is. Yes.
So you're originally from the United States. Says here you came to Japan when you were 20, and you basically have stayed there.
Yes.
And
yes.
you've had a very varied working career, it sounds like to me. It says you worked in pharmaceuticals, banking,
Right.
short period as a chef, as I understand.
Not as a chef, but I did study at the Cordon Bleu School of Cooking. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I cook at home a lot, and yes, I enjoy that. Yeah. Actually, I'm from the UK. I'm from London. And as you say, I came here in 74. And I originally had a place at Cambridge University in England to study Japanese. And however, I didn't really feel that I had the academic strength to complete a degree. In England, because well, at that time, it was a free education, including university. The authorities were very strict, and if you didn't pass your year-end exams, they just throw you out. So there's a lot of pressure on everybody to complete a 3-year degree, and I thought I wouldn't make it, so I decided to come to Japan for 1 year, what we call a gap year. It's a gap between high school and university, and to study Japanese and to be that much ahead of everybody else in the class when I got there. But I thought, well, why study Japanese in England when you can do it in Japan? So I stayed here and never went back. Yes. It's I got a life sentence without any chance of reprise.
So you're basically been an expat for most of your adult life. That's kind of cool.
Yes, so it's interesting, it's challenging, because the cultures, in many ways, the cultures are similar, because this is an island nation and England's an island nation. And so historically, we have very similar traits, kind of like independence, and the Japanese talk about the purity of their culture. However, there are a lot of negative aspects, prejudice and this sort of thing, which I face on a daily basis. I know how to handle it now, but in the beginning, it was frustrating.
Do people still call you gaijin over there?
Yes, they do. Yes, and the rude ones I just ignore nowadays. I don't need their help.
Yeah, I definitely can see that.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about what you've been working on, I guess, in the past year. I know you released a book back in November as the conclusion to your series on Freemasonry.
Correct.
And you said you're one of the first people, the first person to make a connection between Freemasonry and Daoism. And I would love to hear more about your thoughts on that.
Right. So firstly, I'd just like to say, you know, I'm not a spokesman for Freemasonry. I'm just an enthusiast. So these are my personal opinions. Um, I've been a Mason now for nearly 38 years. I'm a 33rd degree Freemason, and that's kind of the end of the road where we, in our system. Um, I joined Freemason. My family are all Freemasons, all on the male side, that is, and they never talked to me about it at home, but I joined in Japan when I had an opportunity. And so at university in England, at London University, the School of Oriental and African Studies, I studied Chinese and Japanese, particularly the literature side. So for Chinese, I studied Confucius and Mencius. And about, let's see, 2016, so 5 years ago, I met a Taoist teacher in Tokyo, and we got talking about many things and found out that in Taiwan, they have once a year, a temple has a kind of initiation ceremony for Taoists. And he invited me to attend, and I was on the plane 2 weeks later. And when I went through the initiation for the Daoism, I realized automatically that it was exactly the same as the first degree in Freemasonry. The elements, it was obviously very Chinese, and they were wearing Chinese clothes, and the words were different, but the main elements were all there. And I was so surprised, and came back and did some research, and I found more and more Chinese elements to Freemasonry, and it became a, you know, I got really a little bit excited about this. So I wrote the first book, which is called Freemasonry Initiation by Light. And then the research just kept on going and going, and I completed the story with the second book, Freemasonry Royal Arch. And that's how it started, really. It was kind of serendipitous.
So those are your four.
Do you want to know more?
Like that's your Freemasonry series. Those 4 books.
So the 4 books are in a series called Spiritual Freemasonry. My belief, I mean, I'm not sure what people understand about Freemasonry. Now, Freemasonry is an international charity, and as a charity, our objective is to help other people. So we give away about $4 million every day to various charities. The ritual of Freemasonry is about teaching a moral story. But at the same time, it's also a kind of shared experience. And so we have these, we call it a peculiar system of morality. And it's veiled in allegory, which is in a story, that is, and illustrated by symbols. And so Freemasonry is rather like a theater where people sit in a circle, and the theater is going on in front of you. And we teach people this peculiar system of morality. We have 3 tenets and 4 virtues of brotherly love, relief, and truth. Well, in Daoism, they have something very similar. They have the Chinese 4 cardinal virtues, as taught by Mencius and Confucius. And so there was a very similar background to Freemasonry and Daoism. So when I went to look deeper into the history, I found that in England, Chinese things were very popular at the end of the 16th century and all through the 17th century. And it started in 1660 with the British East India Company bringing tea from China to England. At that time, coffee had just become popular because we would, due to um, British or English interest, Britain didn't exist at the time. It was still England. That Britain came in later, but England's interests in commerce in the Caribbean, we were importing coffee, and also from Africa. And so coffee was very popular, but suddenly there was this craze for tea. And with the tea, we didn't have the cups to drink it. We only had pottery mugs. And so the East India Company started bringing Chinaware, very high quality China from China to England. And they actually redesigned the cups and they put a handle on it because in China, they don't have handles on their teacups. And so if you look at a teacup and take the handle off, many of the teacups that we use nowadays are actually based on a Chinese design. The ships used to do a triangular trade going from England to India, and then from India they would take opium to China. This is became a big issue, of course, and it became the Opium Wars of 1830s. But so the ships had to be full all the time. You couldn't sail an empty ship. So they would take something, I forget what it was. I think it's pig iron, I think, was taken from England to India, then opium to China. And the ships would use the teacups and plates and things. They use it as ballast for the ships. Otherwise, the ships wouldn't sail upright. And so more and more things were coming from China. So after we had tea and Chinaware, then silk came in and food stuffs came in. Things like ginseng came from China. And so more and more the trade expanded. And starting in about the 70s, so Freemasonry started in 1717. And at the same time, oh, sorry, a bit earlier than this, the late 1680s, the Jesuits, who were missionaries in China, they started translating the Chinese classics for the Confucius Analects and Mencius, also the I Ching, Tao Te Ching. They translated all these books into Latin, and they published them in Paris, where they were based. England was a Protestant country, so Catholic Jesuits were not very welcome. But the books were imported from Paris into London, and they became very popular. Then following this, there were people who actually visited China with these, either with the Jesuits or with some trade mission. And they started bringing back Chinese designs. And so in that time, the early 1720s, there was a design called chinoiserie. It's there was a design Louis XIV called Rococo, and it was a kind of delicate furniture with flowers painted or carved into the wood, and the cabinets and the tables all as a matching set. Then 1720, in came the chinoiserie, which was introducing the Chinese motifs into these patterns on the furniture. So, for example, they would have exotic Chinese gardens, they would have dragons, they would have unique flowers that didn't exist in Europe, just totally, which was kind of exciting to the people living in Europe. They'd never seen anything like it before, and it became extremely popular. And then from there, it actually influenced house designs and gardens. So the the way things work in Europe at that time was, whatever the king did, then the courtiers would copy. They would, they wanted to be fashionable. And if the courtiers did it, then all the aristocrats also copied. And it didn't really trickle down to the man in the street. I don't think he was too interested in Chinese silkware and clothes and tea and things like that. But the rich people who had a lot of money to spare, they would design Chinese elements into their houses to be seen as being kind of fashionable. And like at the entrance to their house, they would have dragons designed on the gates of their house, or the interior, they would have Chinese wallpaper. It was handmade in those days, hand drawn. They would have all this Chinese type of furniture. Of course, they would serve tea, to Chinese tea, and so there was even there's a painting of Isaac Newton wearing a Chinese silk gown, which is not so well known. Yeah, so all these Chinese things came into China. So you got the Chinese foods, you got the clothes, you've got the house designs. The first, so the way Freemasonry developed in England, three gentry who are, in England we have a fairly structured social system, and we have the nobility and the royalty. And the nobility is I think there's 6 or 7 different classes of nobility. It starts at the top with the dukes, then it was marquis, marchioness, earls, viscounts, barons, and yes, that's right, barons the lowest. We have lords, which are just titles. Many people who are baron are called lord. Then we have spiritual lords, and then feudal lords. It's a little bit crazy. And so gentry are the people who are basically the professional people, and they don't have titles. So there will be doctors and professors and lawyers and people like that. So 3 of the gentry started or restarted Freemasonry in 1717. And following them, they wanted to have an aristocrat or a noble person, noble, to actually run the organization. And so for the next 30 years, we had a lot of dukes and earls who were the grand master of the organization. And then in about, the date eludes me, but I think it's 1780 or so, the Prince of Wales, George, the Prince of Wales, became Grand Master. And that was a big deal because that he was royalty. He was son of King George III. And in 1820, he became King George IV himself. But when he was Prince of Wales, he was really spoiled by his father and given a lot of money and whatever. And he designed Chinese two buildings. One is Carlton House in England. Inside it has a lot of Chinese designs. And then he built a pavilion for himself in the south of England called Brighton Pavilion. And Brighton Pavilion is actually a Gothic Indian design. It looks rather like the Taj Mahal, but not as large as the Taj Mahal, but 5 times as many onion domes and things like that. But inside there are a lot of Chinese motifs, and the windows, stained windows with Chinese designs, Chinese wallpaper. So, this whole Chinese thing was a real issue in the 1700s, and I wasn't aware of this until I studied it. And so When I looked at the ritual of Freemasonry, there are so many things similar. For example, Freemasons have 3 senior officers. It's the Master of the Lodge and senior and junior wardens. Well, so does Daoism. They have in the Taoist temple, they have 3 commanders, they're called, and the senior one is called the Light Transmitting Officer. That's a kind of direct translation from Chinese. And the another thing that struck me about this was that Freemasonry is not a religion, and neither is Taoism. People misunderstand that. I think Taoism is more like a way of life. They worship their ancestors, but it isn't. Actually, I should step back a little bit, because there are actually 3 types of Taoism. There's Dao Jiao, Dao Jia, and Minjian Dao, I think it is. So the first 2, Dao Jia, is the philosophical Taoism, and the Dao Jiao is the religious, and they're into all sorts of things like invocations and ritual magic, and you think whatever you could think of, they do it. But the Dao Jia, which I joined, is the philosophical one, and they revere Confucius and Taoism and the Tao Te Ching, and that's what they study and they teach people. And so the Taoism that I know, the philosophical Taoism, they initiate with light. And the only other organization to do that is the Freemasons, because other organizations, including religions, they normally use fire or water in the initiation, but they're only Freemasons and Taoists use light, and that to me was a key point, I think. Yes, so does that help?
It gives me, well, it gives kind of an overview. You're kind of, I mean, we're talking about, I would say, some, well, not complicated, but long histories on either side, right? Because
Yes.
for myself, like, I'm fairly new to Taoism in a traditional sense. I'm more of a self-taught Taoist than go seek out a Taoist master. And but it sounds like you've spent some time with people who have been in both the philosophical and the like practicing Taoism. And then, like, to me, and I don't want to come across as like an ignorant person, but I always thought Freemasonry was a secret society, and it doesn't sound like that's the case anymore.
Yes, so that's the image.
Forgive me if I'm wrong on that point.
No, it's a valid point. So when Freemasonry started in 1717, England was in a very difficult position because it was a Protestant nation, but we had in the previous 100 years, from 1603, we had Catholic kings running a Protestant nation. So there was a lot of friction there, and included many attempts to kill the king, like the Gunpowder Plot and other Throgmorton Plot and all the plots that went on. So in the 1717s, when we, after King William and Mary III and King William III, who set up all this college and university in America, then we had George I, who came from Germany to be King of England, but he was a Protestant, so he was a good guy. Mm-hmm. So the issue had been that England was in this in a circle. Around us were Catholic nations. In the north, you had Scotland, had previously been Catholic. It still had a lot of Catholic Highlanders and lords and bishops, but mainly at that time it was Presbyterian. But Ireland was Catholic, so was France and Spain. And King Louis XIV wanted to bring England back into the Catholic fold, and there were many sort of attempts with the old pretender and then the young pretender. This is the pretenders to the throne of England. So you may have heard of somebody called Bonnie Prince Charlie. He's the young pretender. He was supported at different times by the Spanish and French to actually to try and take the throne of England by force, to reintroduce Catholicism. So for the Freemasons, some of the issues we had was security. We didn't want people to burst into our meetings and try and disrupt us, or even to know who our members were. So we have a person on the outside of the meetings called a Tyler, and he holds a sword. And the idea is that anyone tries to burst into the meeting, we hold him off. And who's the likely candidates? Well, the people who may try to get in were the Jacobites. These are supporters of of King James, the Catholic King James. They had several uprisings in England. The last was 1745. That's 25 years after the beginning of Freemasonry. They were still trying to take the throne. And so, apart from the Jacobites, there was the Spanish Inquisition. You may have seen in Monty Python, the Spanish Inquisition. Once you've seen that, you never forget. But yeah, they had spies all over.
Yeah.
They had spies all over England, and they also tried to get into the meetings. So we tried to keep us where we were meeting as a secret. And we had secret words and signs and handshakes and things, so that only bona fide members could get in, to stop other people to get in. That's the origin of the secret society. And it may seem strange, but in Japan, the Japanese love conspiracy theories, and they still think that Freemasons is a Jewish organization trying to overthrow the world. You know, and they write these articles in America. And we had somebody try to break into one of our meetings only about a year ago. A Japanese person broke into the lodge and tried to force his way in, but he was stopped by the Tyler. So you know, we're not really a secret organization. We have obviously some secrets, otherwise, you know, why would people become members? That's what they want to know, you know, our teaching. But it's like anybody. You have a bank account and you just don't tell people what your bank balance is, or, you know, there's private information, and that's how we see secrecy ourselves. It's just to do with us. It's nothing to do with anybody else, you know. So it's but there's a second level to this as well. So the meeting and who we are and what we do, that's up to us. It's private business. But actually the teachings themselves do have secrets in them, and kind of hidden teaching. And that's what I've been writing about in my Spiritual Freemasonry series. Because the Taoists were, they started, well, there are records going back to 200 BC of this initiation that they were giving, and it's been continued all the way, probably without very little, with 2,200 years. Freemasons had adopted this secret teaching, or this initiation. So that's why my book is called Initiation by Light, because that's what they were doing. But there's a second part to it, which was probably what we would now term as secret, is that the Taoists were familiar with out-of-body experiences, and they write about it in both the Tao Te Ching and the I Ching. You just have to be familiar with the way they phrase things, because it just seems to be a little bit unfamiliar to us, the way they phrase it. There was a book written, I think, well, we know it was published in 1600s. It was written by Lu Dongbing, and it's called The Secret of the Golden Flower. It's been translated into English now. It's got an introduction by Carl Jung, and it teaches of a Chinese method of out-of-body experience. And I believe the Chinese have known about this for thousands of years. But in England, we didn't know anything about it because we were so Bible-oriented Christians. We would have seen this as being the work of the devil or witchcraft or something like this. But to the Chinese, they conversely saw this as a very high spiritual attainment to be able to achieve this. And the way it's explained in the Secret of the Golden Flower is very complicated and takes many years to achieve. We now know by reading, for example, I'm now looking at my bookshelf here, but Robert Munro, Robert Peterson, people like William Bullman, and these writers who write about the modern way of out-of-body experience and how it is the highest level of spiritual experience. And I think this is the secret that's actually hidden in our ritual, but nobody, modern Freemasons do not see that. They're not looking for it, so they don't see it. But secondly, it's not obvious. It's very subtly hidden in the ritual. So yes, that's where we are.
So I guess I want to ask is, what originally attracted you to becoming a Freemason, right? I guess besides it was a family connection, and then how are you a practicing Freemason in a foreign country? I guess there's chapters. Is that correct?
Yes, so we have lodges,
Or
and
am I hitting the mark?
yeah, no, we have. So the thing about Freemasonry is that, firstly, as I mentioned earlier, it's an international organization, but there is no one top person. There's no guiding light or authority at the top. So each country has its own organization. We all maintain the same rules. The ritual is nearly exactly the same everywhere you go. And that's one of the interesting things, is how this organization expanded and developed. Of course, for example, the American War of Independence, when the British were fighting in the eastern states, sorry, we took Freemasonry with us. And so we set up lodges in the eastern states, and one of the oldest Grand Lodges in the world. Well, the oldest is the Grand Lodge of England, and then the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and then the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts is the third oldest, and then Grand Lodge of Ireland. And so the way it grew was this way. So also going the other way, later in the 1800s with Victoria and the imperial growth of Imperial England into India and other countries, we took Masonry with us. And then Masonry has a very long history in India and Northern African states, all around the world, really. Indonesia, Singapore, it's just everywhere. And so this way of, I don't know if colonization is PC any longer, but basically we took Freemasonry with us. And so in Japan, we had traders coming from England and all around the world, including the Netherlands, trading with Japan, and they set up lodges. So our official lodge wasn't established here until, I believe, in the 1950s. And so before that, we didn't have a Grand Lodge. We just had the the uh, the daughters, we call them daughters, but the mother and the daughter. So the daughters, the lodges. And so we had the lodges, we just didn't have the organization to control it until the 50s. So each lodge, basically a lodge is a group of people. It's not a building as such. People think of it as a building because that's what the word means, but we can meet anywhere. So if you have 5 or 7 or more, you can start a lodge. If you get authority from you just don't start, you have to have authority from the Grand Lodge, but once you've received that, you can start, and you can meet in restaurants. In the old days, they used to meet in pubs, and this is one of the hints. It's a bit of a tangent, but this is one of the hints that led me to believe that there was more to Freemasonry than meets the eye, because in the early days, in the 1720s, lodges were held in pubs. So pubs normally had spare rooms above the pub for meetings and eating and like having, I don't know, a wedding celebration or something like that, have empty rooms. So the Masons would rent this room above, and then they would have their meetings. Well, we have records of some of the early meetings, and I'm looking at my book here to get the exact date, but the early meetings, I think it was 1724, and we had some really important people turning up to the meetings. So, for example, we had dukes and earls, the future king of Germany, Leopold I, and then we had the Secretary of State for Scotland, the Vice Admiral, and other people of this stature were meeting in a pub to discuss something. Well, it wasn't morality. And though now we talk about Freemasonry as being a peculiar system of morality, but I doubt that a duke would go to a pub to be given a lecture on morality. I think that he would feel that that is insulting. He was already a moral person as far as he was concerned. Morality is something the church teaches. And in England at that time, by law, everybody had to go to church on a Sunday. That's the way, otherwise you would be fined. And that was from the nobility to the most humble person in the field. Everybody had to go to church. That's where they learned their morality. I don't see a duke and the future king of Germany going to a pub to learn about morality. There was something extra, and it was this alchemy that Chinese alchemy is what I refer to as it's a spiritual alchemy of how to well, first of all, you have to awaken the spirit, and that's what the light's for. You bring the light from the universe to the individual to awaken his soul to a more spiritual way of thinking. And we have 3 degrees. The Chinese don't have 3 degrees. They only have, the Tao only has the first degree, but we have 3 degrees, and they show how to develop this spiritual energy, which is very similar to the Chinese qi, and the qi energy is circulated in the body. But the difference with the qi is that in Daoism, in the teachings of the Golden Flower, this qi energy actually leaves the body as like a doppelganger, and is able to roam, visit anywhere. The spiritual plane, the terrestrial plane, meaning Earth, and it can go forward and back in time. It is really a very unique situation, and this takes a lot of training, but it is possible. And many people have written about it, including one of my heroes, William Bullman. So I think that is what they were going to learn about. I think that would have been very exciting. The other thing is that the Royal Society had been established in 1660, and people were now thinking in terms of physics and chemistry as being unique studies or disciplines. So geology and things like this. Previously, there hadn't been. It was just general study, what they termed as natural philosophy. It was just studying anything, all mixed up. But 1660, it was actually took more than probably 10, 15 years, but they started setting up the Royal Academy of Chemistry and the Academy of whatever, physics, the Academy of Geology. And so people became, from that time on, they became more specialized in their academic studies. And this is the time when alchemy, as we knew it, started to die. So before the Royal Society, alchemy was one of the major forms of scientific study. And many people believe that it was alchemy was a search for the way to turn base metal, which is lead, into gold. Well, it was that, but it was also other things as well. And different people used alchemical technology to create different things. So, for example, monks like the Benedictine monks, they used alchemy to make a herbal mixture, like a tonic, and it's called Benedictine, and you can actually buy it in the shops now. It's quite popular. So it's a kind of tonic. So people were using the techniques of alchemy for fermentation. They were making it for cosmetics, for medicines. They were taking herbal medicines and trying to make them less bitter and easier to swallow. They were taking that bitterness out. This was all using those 7 techniques of dissolution, calcination, and evaporation, and all the other things that the alchemists did. So, but there was a kind of gray area between the death of alchemy and the beginning of modern science, and this is exactly when the Freemasons established, the 1717s. And one of the leading lights was Sir Isaac Newton. He was a dyed-in-the-wool alchemist. Most historians don't know about Isaac Newton's studies of alchemy. It was only like 200 years after his death, which is like 50 years ago, that they found his papers hidden in some library at a university, and they were all alchemical. They were to do with calculations and things. And it's known that Isaac Newton had alchemical ovens built in his garden for doing experimentation and things. And after his death, his hair was analyzed, and there was found to be very heavy concentration of mercury in his hair. And so it's felt that mercury was one of the reasons that he died, was one of the contributing factors. But what is interesting to me is that I mentioned that there were 3 gentlemen that started Freemasonry. They were all friends of Isaac Newton in one way or another. Isaac Newton was the director of the Royal Mint, responsible for printing money. Well, actually, they coined it in those days. They didn't have paper money. They used just coins. And but in the same building was George Payne. He was the director of the Treasury. And so they were in the same building. They would have known each other because London at that time was such a small place. It was 500,000 people in the whole of London. And so in a government office, unlike now when, governments have ballooned, they've got so many people in government nowadays. In the 1700s, they probably only had 30 or 40 people running the treasury. You didn't need any more, And so that's interesting, one point. The second point, that Newton was the president of the Royal Society, and his secretary was a second Grand Master, John de Sagulier. And so, and the third Grand Master, the Gentry, his name is Anthony Sayer, is suspected to have been an alchemist. And as Newton was an alchemist, it's possible that they knew each other. I don't think these things are coincidences. I think this is part of a story of the death of alchemy, the beginning of science. And Freemasons had stumbled upon a Chinese system of alchemy where we could not change lead into gold, but we could change our spirit. We could strengthen our spirit. We could that was it, exercise our spirit and or soul. No, it would be spirit. It's the terminology a little bit difficult, but we would able to, our spirit to leave our body. And why this would be, and there's a second point about this, is at the time in England there was a what should I call it, I called it a cause célèbre, which means a country, but there was there were many people who claimed that the soul did not exist. Well, it's difficult because in the Bible there is very little said about the quality of the soul or what happens when the soul dies. It's just not in the Bible. And so the Catholic Church, or the Protestant Church in England, didn't have an answer for this. So people were writing all sorts of things, and the government didn't know how to handle this. So at one point, even in the Houses of Parliament, one author's book was debated upon, and it was found to be blasphemous because he said the soul was a heathen invention. And so the books were burned by the public hangman. And because they put the books in a bonfire and people all came around, it actually made the books more popular, and he sold even more books. People like, anything to do with suspicion or anyway. So we had all these things coming together at one point. We had people who didn't understand about the reality of immortality. Well, if you could succeed at the Chinese Taoist technique of the soul spirit leaving the body and then coming back, well, there would be no better way to prove that we are immortal, that the spirit never dies. And so this coming together with the interest in Chinese things, the Chinese philosophy coming into England, the alchemical, the hunt for the secret to alchemy was coming to an end. The Freemasons probably saw themselves as writing a ritual or a play which would show the individual a way in a graphic form of how to succeed to have the body leaves the spirit leaves the body in an out-of-body experience. They didn't write it down, they made a play of it. And that's what's really interesting to me. William?
So when you say they made a play of it, like they made like a stage production? Yeah.
Yes.
They made a stage production play, or?
No, they made a staged production.
Okay.
So this is based on a long history in England. We had a guild system which started in about the 1100s. The guild system is there to organize education for a certain subject. So, for example, people who are going to be leather workers, there is a leather workers guild, and they join the guild as an apprentice. They would serve a 7-year apprenticeship. At the end, they would make a beautiful piece of leather, whatever, like probably a saddle or something, probably a saddle. And they make it really beautifully to show how good their skill is. This is what we call a masterpiece, because they would then be called a master leather worker. And so once the masterpiece has been completed, the guild would keep the masterpiece in the guild hall. And so then the person from his apprenticeship would now be able to charge people to and sell his wares. Before that, he wasn't able to do that as an apprentice. Freemasons also have apprenticeships, and we called entered apprentice. It's our first degree. You're an entered apprentice. So the guild system is important because they have a patron saint. This is fairly classic because when the guild system started, England was still a Catholic country until 1534, King Henry VIII, and the dissolution of the monasteries, etc. So until the 1500s, 400 years, the guilds were all Catholic. And they used to put on plays every year in after the what's it called? I'm forgetting. I don't normally think in English, so I'm normally thinking in Japanese. Harvest festival, yes. So after the harvest had been brought in, people could take time off and relax because winter's about to come. Just after the harvest festival, the guilds would then would have a party to celebrate, and to celebrate their patron saint. They would go to a church, and they started by putting on small plays, and they were kind of educational plays. And you had three types of these plays. There was a I forget the name. There was a miracle play, there was a mystery play, and there was a third play, and the name escapes me. But these were either stories in the round, which means it's not a stage and people sitting and watching the stage, but they sit in a circle around the players, so theatre in the round. And they would put on stories of either the lives of the saints or stories about virtue. And after a while, these plays changed, and they got larger, and they started touring. And after, sometimes they would all get together, the people who, like the Guild of the Fletchers. Fletchers are people who put feathers on arrows. That's all they do. It doesn't sound very complicated, but they put feathers on arrows, but I'm sure there's a technique to it. So you got the Fletchers and the Coopers, people who make barrels. They all got together and put on massive plays that would go on for like a week or even longer. And sometimes there would be different sections of the play. There may be 40 or 50 different parts to the play. And they would tour, they go around. So the play was so large, it couldn't be inside a church any longer. They'd have to use the village green. And then because the people, hundreds of people connecting in one place, then you'd have people coming to sell things, selling beer, selling fruit, selling pastries. And it became a carnival. And it was the beginning of our carnival in England. And so this history of having a play around a guild with entered apprentices has a history of 600 years before the Freemasons started. So when they proposed this idea, nobody thought it strange. It was quite natural. It was just an extension of what had been happening for so long. It's just it was now, it wasn't a working class entertainment. It was the gentry, the educated, and then the nobility and the aristocracy were involved. And that's where the change is. That's the major change in for Freemasonry from the guilds. And now, in fact, the guilds still exist in England. We call them livery companies, and we have, I think, 110 in England, the weavers. And we also have a livery company called the Masons. And if you go to the website, it says at the top, we are not Freemasons. It was masonry. It was actually building churches and doing the stonework and making statues for churches. And that's what they still do today. So yes, it's a play.
yeah, that's how I traditionally, yeah, that's how I traditionally associate Freemasonry as like brick and cathedral, and more like an
Right,
architecture, right?
right. So
Like
we
is that a component of Freemasonry,
yes, yeah,
architecture?
yes. So um, since uh, since England started, I think probably 800s, probably from then onwards, we were building in brick. We were building monasteries and abbeys and things like that, and we had masons. But these are what we call operative masons, the people who work with their hands and build buildings. And in 1717, uh, the Freemasons, who we now term speculative, because we build with our minds, not with our hands, and that's the major difference. We're not working class people, we're not blue collar laborers. Mostly Freemasons are professionals, and so we're trying to build something very different from what the operative Masons did, but we use the same terminology of the operative Masons. For example, we use what we call working tools. Our tools are hammers, chisels, trowels, square and compass, of course, and a measure, like a measuring tape, measuring ruler, scale. And so we use the same terminology, but the
Yeah.
objective is very different from the original operative Masons. And of course, many Americans have, in the early
I have a
days.
question for you.
Sure.
Do you meditate?
Me personally,
Is
sometimes
that a
I do.
practice that you partake in?
No, Freemasons don't. I mean, that's an individual choice, but in the lodge we don't.
Okay.
We, because it's based on a Christian organization, we have a copy of the Bible, we have prayers, and we have lessons taken from the Bible in each of our 3 degrees. Initially, Freemasonry was a Christian organization, but now we're a syncretic organization. So if, for example, a Muslim was to join um, our lodge, we would have a copy of the Quran on the altar for him. We've had, when a Chinese friend of mine, who actually I introduced to him, he had a copy of the I Ching on the altar when he was initiated.
Okay. What advice would you give to someone wanting to pursue a career or a path similar to yours? I know your path has been very varied, but do you have any
So
advice
first, yes,
in that regard?
firstly, I would recommend that they read something. You don't have to know anything about Freemasonry to become a Freemason. We teach you, that's the whole idea. But we want people who are moral people, and people who are interested in contributing or supporting societies. What we do, we spend a lot of time supporting charities, giving money and our time. Like in Tokyo, we feed the poor and hungry. We go out at night with something called the Rice Patrol and give out food and things like this. We also support orphanage. Yes, orphanage. We have parties and events for orphans and things like that.
Orphanages? Yeah.
Yeah. So but every country, every lodge is different. That's what's interesting. They make their own decisions how to collect the money and how to spend it. So that's so I would read about it. Of course, I would like people to read my book, this because it talks about the early days and how Freemasonry begun, the beginning of Freemasonry. In any of the books in my Spiritual Freemasonry series would be a good start. I mean, probably the best place to start is with the Initiation by Light, because that's where you start. But anyway, So reading's good, and but just to go with an open mind. And how you join a lodge, well, if you know a Freemason, you should ask him, because we have a rule that we're not allowed to ask people to join. We don't do proselytization. Um, People have to join of what we say of their own free will and accord, and we don't want to pressure people to join. So if you want to join and you don't know a Freemason, the best way is to look it up in the telephone book, look up the Grand Lodge. So if you live in British Columbia, you could look up Grand Lodge of British Columbia or Grand Lodge of Alaska and ask them, I'd like to join a lodge, what should I do? And they will introduce you to someone. It's as easy as that.
Okay.
And the other thing is
I was wondering about that.
which is close to where you live. And the other thing is you can change lodges once you've joined a lodge. If you know, you can change and join another lodge or whatever you want. And there's so many other things you can do. We have Masonic clubs. We have clubs. We have clubs for people who drive motorbikes called the Widow's Sons. We have bowling clubs. We have golfing clubs. We have lots of organizations. So it's not just morality. It's a fraternity, and we enjoy having good fun.
Okay. I get. Are women allowed to join?
Yes, we have. So I think the reason for this is the same as goes back to Daoism. Daoism originally was part of the court ritual. It was for the emperor, and before the emperor, there were kings in China. The first emperor was started, I think, in 200 BC, 220 BC. So before that, it was kingdoms. And so in the court, there were only men, and this was Daoism was the court religion. And so because of that reason, only men were allowed in to study Daoism in the early days. Then I think sometime around the 1950s, Daoism in Taiwan became open to women. And so now if you go to a Taoist lodge, it's not called a Taoist temple, sorry, the women sit on the left-hand side and the men sit on the right-hand side. Everyone wears black and white, and it's similar in Freemasonry. We wear dark clothes and white gloves. And so in Taoism, it is now both men and female. However, in Freemasonry, it is still mainly a men-only organization. However, since the 1900s, women have set up their own organizations. So we have women Freemasons. We also have the Order of the Eastern Star and Job's Daughters. And for the younger girls, high school girls, who've got the Rainbow Girls. And so they have their own organizations. We do meet for banquets and parties, but we don't meet in lodge together.
If you were giving advice to a doomer to getting back on the path to a bloomer in life, business, and relationships, what would you tell them?
About relationships.
You're in a darker spot right now. Where would you?
If you were in, okay.
Well, in life, business, or relationships, just
right. Okay. Well,
yeah. If you're in a bad headspace.
Right. Yes. Understood. I also run a non-profit called Life Management for people who are feeling suicidal, and so I talk to people, and I think drugs will, if you're feeling depressed, drugs will not help you. It's just a short term. The only thing that's going to help you is other people sharing your story, sharing your pain. And so if you're in a dark place, you have to reach out and ask somebody. Alcohol and drugs are not the answer. It's a short term. I'm coming from the pharmaceutical industry. I shouldn't be saying this, but drugs only help to alleviate the symptoms, but they don't get down to the core problem why you're depressed in the first place. And I've met a lot of suicidal people, so I know the best way is to what I do is I just take them for a cup of coffee, and if I have to hold their hand and talk to them, that's what I do. Listen to them, and listening is so important. People have something inside them that need to get it out. Um, However, there is another level, which is more of a spiritual level, where they may be taken over by negative energy. And that's where they need a more of a professional approach, where they would probably have to see a priest or somebody who understands these things. Because I believe we live in a very spiritual world. You know, if we can leave our bodies and roam the universe, well, anything can be possible. And so negative energy, so it's the church doesn't talk about demons any longer. If you talk about devils and possession and things like that, they say, oh yeah, we're in the modern church, we don't talk about that, which is a big mistake. The Vatican has increased they used to have only 2 exorcists in New York, and I think they increased it to 12 because of the demand for exorcisms in New York. So depression can lead to greater problems. And so first you need to talk to people, and if they seem to be really disturbed and having a hard time, then perhaps find a priest or somebody who understands these things and get them to help. But it's about people. That's the bottom line.
Coming back to the out of body.
Yep.
Yeah, it's all. Yeah, absolutely. It's about people. Coming back to the out of body experience. Have you ever had your own out of body experience?
Yes, 12 times. And I write them down when I have them because...
12 times.
Yes, yeah. And they have only 2 have been intentional. The others have been spontaneous. So I have asthma, and one of the strange things about asthma is that you often get nasal polyps, which is a kind of growth inside the nose. The doctors don't know the relationship, but I get it quite a lot. So I've had to have surgery twice, and when they operate on your nose, it's not a local anesthetic, it's a whole body total anesthetic. And at that time, on 2 times, I've had out of body experiences. I sat up and saw the doctors operating on me, which was a surprise. Yes, and so this out of body experience is very exciting. It's a leap into the unknown because there's no coaching, there's no one who can make a shortcut, or if you do this, it's easier. It's not, I don't want to say it's not easy, but it's a challenge, but it is very, very exciting. Very exciting, and it's very safe. Nothing can happen to you. It feels like magic. It feels like you're joining the angels or something. But in fact, the angels are on a different dimension to us, so you don't actually meet angels. But and if anyone wants to read about this whole thing about spiritual world, I would recommend the book 30 Years Among the Dead by Carl Wickland. It was written sometime in the Victorian era, so the English is a little bit difficult sometimes, but it's about a psychiatrist, Dr. Wickland, and his wife, who's a medium, and they were healing sick people by exercising themselves. And they would talk to the spirits. It's really, really interesting. And it's like 200 yen. It's about $2 as an ebook.
Okay. I wrote it down. And then my second to last follow-up question is, how can you be of service to your community and the world? I think
Well,
you've already
yeah,
answered this one, but
yeah. One of the things that's one of the
your
great
fresh
things
take
about
on it.
Masonry is as an individual, it's difficult to do something big, like helping uh, autistic children, or um, like in the Freemasons in Texas and Arizona, they have free hospital service for children with burns or autistic children. Um, Also with children with bone problems, and they don't charge the children. The children get free, care. They can do that because they amass all their um, uh, facilities, the money, the energy of the members, and they amass it, and then they put it into one big project. So as an individual, we may not be able to do much, but as a group like Freemasons, we can do a lot of good, and we do a lot of good. So I that's another reason for recommending joining Freemasonry. I don't know
And
if
the
you,
other thing here,
I,
it says you're a biomagnet therapist.
oh yeah. So I'm a biomagnet therapist.
What is biomagnet therapy?
Yeah, this is very, very interesting.
Is that
So
a
I
is that an energy? Is a
Yeah, so I've suffered with asthma for 25 years, and I've keep on looking for an alternative therapy to either heal myself or at least relieve the symptoms. So some of the symptoms, of course, difficulty breathing, but coughing, phlegm, difficulty walking because you can't breathe deeply, and sometimes also going into kind of shock and having to go to hospital. So through my research, I came across biomagnetism. And what it is basically, it is similar to acupuncture, but instead of using needles, we use small magnets. They are neodymium, which is a rare earth magnet. Um, Rare earth actually is a misnomer because rare earth isn't rare at all. Um, so the neodymium magnets are actually very cheap. You can, for like $5, you can get 50 of them. Basically, how it's done is the acupuncture, they use meridians, and you're able to release energy by hitting acupuncture points. But with biomagnetism, we use magnets in a pair. We use a positive and a negative, same magnet but upside down, and the magnet energy flows between the two, and it's able to change the pH in that part of the body that you're working on. And I've been for the last, I studied this, I think in 2017, and I've been, not just myself, I've noticed real important changes in my health, but I've also been able to reduce any medicines I take for asthma, and I get better breathing. It's just totally better. But I also started treating people who have Parkinson's disease. So when I got the qualification as a biomagnet therapist, you can find it online. I was thinking, well, how am I going to use it? And so I can't go around people who've got serious diseases and say, well, let me try with these magnets, because it's not really ethical. So I thought about people who have rare diseases, and it's not well known, but there are over 200 diseases for which there is no therapy at all, no medicine at all. So these patients, they either get painkillers or they get anti-inflammatories like corticosteroids or something like that. And these people are basically, their quality of life is zilch. So I decided to focus on this area. One of the biggest rare disease is Parkinson's disease, and I've had some really good results. I did a clinical trial together with a friend who is head of neuroscience. My background is neuroscience, so I know something about this, and I have a lot of friends in the area, in the specialty. So together we did a clinical trial at his university, and out of 5 patients who had terminal Parkinson's, which meant they were so restricted they couldn't move their limbs, they couldn't open their hands to hold a fork, they couldn't feed themselves, they were in pain all the time. Of those 5 patients, 4 of them returned home under their own volition. They were able to move a wheelchair. The doctor was so surprised. I think I was surprised too, but, and we didn't change anything. We kept the same medication, and it took about 12 sessions, 1 session a week, so 12 weeks. And the patient sat up in bed, moved to a wheelchair, and she wheeled herself out of the hospital. That was really exciting. So that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years now.
Oh, okay. And where can our listeners connect with you online?
Great. So my private, my personal website is chris-earnshaw.com. I have Twitter, which is author Earnshaw. I've got podcasts on, I think if you put spiritual Freemasonry in inverted commas in Google, I think I take the top 10 spaces. You will be able to find me somewhere. Chris Earnshaw. There's another famous Chris Earnshaw who is head of British Telecom, but that's not me.
Oh, okay. Not to be confused, eh? And then last and finally, I always ask this question just for fun. Yep. What is your zombie plan, Chris? Do you have a zombie plan?
Yeah, I'm going to join the preppers, I think.
I will
pay to join the preppers.
All right.
I think they got supplies of baked beans and things we can just about survive.
All right. Thanks for coming on the show, Chris. I really appreciated your insight. I've learned a lot in the last hour or so. So those of us out there in the world, now you are just as much more educated on Freemasonry and the connection to Daoism that I never knew was there. Thanks for stopping by, everybody. If you enjoyed this conversation with Christopher Earnshaw today, please be sure to check out the rest of his books on spiritual Freemasonry on Amazon, specifically Initiation by Light, and his YouTube channel, Spiritual Freemasonry. Here at the Doomer Bloomer podcast, we're always looking for interesting guests, such as Chris. If you would like to reach us directly, we are on all social medias at the Doomer Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you would like a little bit of extra help from me directly, book my time. We have a coaching program available, the 10 Pillars Framework to Success, Life and Business and Relationships. We have a Patreon page. You can get some swag from our Teespring store, or check out our GoFundMe page. If you are listening out there and you just want to rebroadcast this or reshare or retweet, the hashtag this week is Freemasonry. Have yourself a great and prosperous day.